Right before we jump into this video, if you're watching it, it's probably because you have some gear. Well, how do you organize it, keep track of it, and protect it? Well, if you don't know, I have a free app called My Gear Vault. You can download it right now for iOS and Android at mygearvault.com. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and this is a side-by-side comparison and versus video to help you decide which one of these three cameras is right for you. This time around, we have the Canon 5D Mark IV versus the EOS R versus the 6D Mark II. Now, I want to remind you that if you don't know that I've already done a real-world review of each one of these cameras, meaning I've used it in the real world, taken sample images, which you can download the raw files. The links are down below or up in the I button on the screen. Now, before I get into the specs, when each one of these cameras were announced, people went nuts over the specs. And not nuts in a good way. A lot of people bitched about, oh my God, this is yesterday's technology in today's camera, and that the EOS R, oh my God, it's terrible, and the 6D Mark II didn't get, actually the 6D Mark II got a ton of hate. These cameras got a ton of hate, but when you use them, you realize they're really not that bad. So I'm here to help you decide if you're in the market for one of these three cameras, which one is the right one for you, and the one that gets the most check marks is probably gonna be the winner. So let's start off with the sensors that you will find inside of these cameras. The 5D Mark IV has a 30.4 megapixel full frame CMOS sensor. The EOS R has a 30.3 megapixel full frame CMOS sensor, which is the same as the 5D Mark IV, but it is optimized with the latest processor. Now, the 6D Mark II has a 26.2 megapixel full frame CMOS sensor. So it's interesting, right? The EOS R has the same exact sensor that you find in the 5D Mark IV. So which one gets the check mark for being better? Well, the EOS R is getting the check mark because it's the same sensor, but it's been optimized with the newer processor, which in this case makes it better. Now, speaking of those processors, you have a Digic 6 Plus in the 5D Mark IV, you have a Digic 8 processor in the EOS R, and in the 6D Mark II, you have a Digic 7 processor in that bad boy. So because of the Digic 8 processor, the newest, the best, the better one, check mark goes to the EOS R. Now let's talk about the ISOs of these cameras, starting with the 5D Mark IV, which goes from 100 to 32,000, expandable to 102,400. The EOS R goes from 100 to 40,000, expandable to 102,400 as well. And the 6D Mark II has the exact same thing at 100 to 40,000, expandable to 102,400. So what's interesting here is that the Nikon and Sony competitors have higher ISO capabilities. You can go much higher, but because they're not on the counter at this time, they're not even in the game, because we're talking about these right here. Now, based off of these ones in front of me right now, I think the EOS R is going to give you the better high ISO capability compared to these other two cameras. I think the 6D Mark II is going to be pretty darn close because it has less megapixels and similar ISO capability. And the 5D Mark IV, it's not going to be far off to the EOS R, but with that being said, again, the newer processor inside of the EOS R makes this the better choice, thus it gets the check mark. Moving on, we need to talk about the mounts on these cameras because we have a new mount with the EOS R. But let's talk about the 5D Mark IV first. We know it's an EF mount. The EOS R is now an RF mount, but you do have the ability to get 3 different adapters that Canon is making to allow you to use and add extra functionality to your EF lenses on this camera. And also, you can get the new RF lenses, which are honestly beasts and kick ass. Now on the 6D Mark II, you have the same EF mount that you have had since the 1990s. Now with all of that being said, again, I gotta go with the EOS R because you have best of both worlds. You've got the RF lenses that can go on natively, and you've got your EF lenses that can go on with an adapter. So check mark this one. Which one of these cameras will get the check mark for frames per second? The 5D Mark IV will allow you to do 7 frames a second. The EOS R will do 8 frames a second in single focus mode, which is kind of weird. It will also do 5 frames a second in speed priority and 3 frames a second in tracking priority. In my real world review, I shot it at the 5 frames a second and it did pretty good. I didn't have a problem with autofocus, but we're not talking about autofocus right now. It really doesn't make sense to shoot that 8 frames a second thing. It's really not that usable. The 6D Mark II comes in at 6.5 frames a second. Now, which gets the check mark? It's not the EOS R. No, it doesn't get the check mark. The check mark clearly goes to the 5D Mark IV for its 7 frames a second. Now, speaking of frames per second, how are the buffers in this camera? Not Michael Buffer or his brother Bobby Buffer. I don't know his brother. His brother does, I don't know what his brother, anyway, let's get into this. The 5D Mark IV can do 21 RAW files, in a row. The EOS R will do 47 RAW files in a row. Basically, I never outran that camera when I was shooting. I just kept holding the button down, and I was like,
I certainly hope I'm in RAW.
And yeah, it just was doing really well at the 5 frames a second, and then you get 21 RAW files with the 6D Mark II. So the 6D Mark II, I'm gonna give that a slight edge over the 5D Mark IV just because it needed some love, but the check mark again goes to EOS R because it has a much better buffer than the other 2 cameras. I wanted to cut in here real quick and let you know that we just released 14 custom Lightroom presets. Check out the different looks you can get quickly by using presets like Black and White Boomify, Aquamarine, Sandlot, Color Boomify, Skittles, and more. Head on over to FroKnowsPhoto.com/presets to play with and purchase all 14 of these presets at 40% off for a limited time. Now let's jump back to the video. Now the reason that the EOS R did better in the buffering department is because it writes to a UHS-2 SD card slot. That is much faster. The problem is there's only 1 card slot in that camera, and I'm just gonna wave my finger like this for a while. That is terrible, bad on you. Shame on you, Canon, for 1 card slot. But they get more shame because in the 6D Mark II, they only have a UHS-1 card slot, which doesn't write as fast, and that only has the 1 card slot as well. Which leaves us with the 5D Mark IV, which I will bitch about the card slots, but it does have 2. It has 1 CF card, oh my God, it has a CF card slot, and 1 SD card slot that's UHS-1. It's using a compact flash card slot? Are you kidding me? Are you crazy? You know what? You're not getting a check mark, 5D Mark IV. You will not get a check mark because you have stupid slots. Nobody gets a check mark. Moving on to the all-important focusing system, the 5D Mark IV employs a 61-point AF system with 41 cross-type sensors. Now keep in mind, they are more clumped into the middle of the frame. They don't touch the outsides or the top. Now the EOS R has a ton of functionalities here. It has 5,655 phase detect AF points. Now you won't see each one of those points inside the camera, but what you can do is you can touch the top, you can touch the bottom with your focusing points, you can get to 1 box from the edge on the right and 1 box from the edge on the left. That is incredible that you can move focusing points all the way around. But there's more. You have the ability to have IAF in 1 shot, and in the future with an upgraded firmware, it will do more. It can focus down to -6 EV with a 1.2 lens and using the center point. It also adds focus peaking and a focus guide, and like I said earlier, it's edge-to-edge focusing. I don't even need to talk about the 6D Mark II, but I will. It has 45 points, all cross-type AF system, which is very nice, and the focusing points are all clumped in the middle. When I did the real-world review of this at the Renaissance Fair, it kind of made it difficult to compose because the focus points are all right in the middle. Where I normally would have a subject on the left side of the frame, I didn't have focusing points, which made me have to lock in and recompose. Now the check mark clearly goes 3 times over to the EOS R for all of its amazing functionality. Now let's talk about the max shutter speeds in these cameras. The 6D Mark II will max out at 1/4000th of a second with a mechanical shutter. It doesn't shoot electronic. The EOS R will max out at 1/8000th of a second, but it also has the ability to shoot completely silent with an electronic shutter up to 1/8000th of a second as well. And the 5D Mark IV, it tops out at 1/8000th of a second as well. And it does not shoot silent because it doesn't have an electronic shutter. Electronic shutter all day, having that capability and having the mechanical shutter gives the check mark to the EOS R. Video capabilities. One of the backbones of Canon and the 5D series has always been its video capabilities, so let's talk about those right now. The 5D Mark IV will do a DCI 4K recording at up to 30 frames a second, but with a 1.74x crop mode. It does 720 at 120 frames per second with no autofocus, and C-Log is not available unless you spend an extra $100 and send it back to get the upgrade. And it records in motion JPEG, which is an extremely bloated file. The issues here is that it didn't come out and shoot full frame 4K. It has a massive 1.74x crop. That's a pain in the butt when you want to shoot wide, and every lens you put on there, you have to multiply. So let's move on to the EOS R. You basically have the same type of video, except it's not DCI 4K this time. It's UHD 4K. Same recording up to 30 frames a second, 720p at 120 frames a second, no AF. C-Log is built in this time. There is 10-bit 422 with C-Log to an external recorder, and it also records in H.264. And they also got rid of the motion JPEG format, which was a really smart idea. And the fact that you don't have to spend an extra $100 with the EOS R makes that a nicer choice as well. Moving on to the 6D Mark II. Ooh, this one does a lot. It does 1080p up to 60 frames a second, only in IPB compression. They really dumbed it down when it came to the 6D Mark II. The winner is going to be the EOS R again. It's getting a check mark. The problem is, I should probably not give any check marks, but this isn't comparing to other cameras that aren't here, because it would have been great if they did full frame 4K. Still, check mark EOS R. Let me jump in here real quick and let you know that this video is brought to you by Squarespace. If you're looking for the best solution to make your own website, well, use Squarespace. That's what I use for jaredpolin.com. You can get a 14-day free trial at squarespace.com/FroKnowsPhoto. If you decide that it's for you, use the code FroKnowsPhoto at checkout to get 10% off your first order. Now let's jump back to the video. Let's look at which camera has the best in-body stabilization. Well, none of them, because they don't have any in-body stabilization in terms of the sensor being stabilized. So the 5D Mark IV doesn't have one, but what the EOS R does have is a digital 5-axis stabilization, except for the fact that it crops in a ton to make up for the fact that it needs to stabilize the footage by cropping in. The 6D Mark II has digital 3-axis stabilization that also crops in a ton. Now, the one thing that these cameras all have going for them is that they have dual pixel autofocus for video, which is a fantastic mode. So I'm gonna give out, 3 check marks. One for this camera, one for this camera, and one for this camera. Now I want to mention the Wi-Fi and NFC and Bluetooth capability. All 3 of these cameras kick ass with the Canon Connect app because you can see what you're shooting and control almost everything from the phone. It's awesome, especially if you're shooting yourself and you want to do self-portraits or shoot video and hit the record button. You can do that right from the app. What the EOS R has that the other cameras don't have is the ability to get instant transfers to your phone if you leave it on. That means, as a backup, some people are saying, you can have a second card slot, which is not really true, but technically it could be. The fact that you can transfer full-res JPEGs. You can't do that with RAW files, so that's why I don't consider it a full-on backup. In this case, I'm not giving anybody a check mark because they all do a great job, so I'll just give you all a pat on the back. Adding on to the video features, there is one camera up here that is stupid because it doesn't have a headphone jack. Anybody know which one it is? Anybody? Bueller? Yeah, the 6D Mark II does not have a headphone jack, which is stupid. It has a microphone jack, but you can't take it seriously without a headphone jack. So check mark doesn't go to this bad boy, it goes to these two right here. Let's talk about big body features. Not like people with, well actually, here's some big body features for you. That's right, nobody cares. Well, that's what they usually yell at me. The 5D Mark IV has a joystick. The EOS R doesn't have a joystick. The 6D Mark II doesn't have a joystick for changing your autofocusing points. But with that being said, the EOS R adds a multi-function bar, which is kind of worthless in my opinion for shooting stills, but could come in handy for shooting video. See my real-world review to see how that function bar works. But what it does add is the ability to touch and drag your focusing points all by using the back LCD screen when your eye is up to the viewfinder. Because of that feature, I've realized that the joystick isn't really needed in the EOS R because it's quicker and pretty accurate to just slide your finger. Just slide it over. I love that feature. That's why checkmark EOS R. Viewfinders. All these cameras have viewfinders, but one of them has an electronic viewfinder. The 5D Mark IV has 100% coverage viewfinder, optical viewfinder. The EOS R is 100% coverage because it is a 3.69 million dot electronic viewfinder. I love electronic viewfinders. And the 6D Mark II has a measly 98% coverage optical viewfinder, which is really puny and really small and really stupid for the fact that it doesn't have 100% coverage. I don't know that many cameras that don't have 100% coverage today that are full frame. That was really bad. The check mark is going to the EOS R for the electronic viewfinder. I love electronic viewfinders for the fact that you can look through them and see a live representation of your exposure. If you're overexposed or underexposed, it's all right there. But also, you can see your video when you're shooting, which makes it much more stable to hold the camera up and shoot video. Sure, you can see your exposure whether you're over or under by using the light meter, but it's a hell of a lot easier to use the electronic viewfinder that you find inside of this camera. Thus, the check mark goes again to the EOS R. And if you haven't checked it out, I did make a video that explains the differences between an electronic viewfinder and an optical viewfinder. It's popping up on your screen right now. Just hit the I button. Would you like to take better pictures in only 11 days? Well, if so, I created a free mini video course that you can sign up for right now at FroKnowsPhoto.com/11 days. Continuing on to the LCD screens on the back of these cameras, which people really bitched that the 5D Mark IV does not have a vari-angle screen. But what it does have is a 3.2-inch 1.62 million dot touchscreen. The EOS R has a 3.15-inch 2.1 million dot vari-angle touchscreen, meaning it flips out and rotates, and the 6D Mark II has a 3-inch 1.04 million dot vari-angle touchscreen. So you pretty much got everything you wanted in the EOS R. The fact that it's only 3.15 instead of 3.2, is that big of a deal? No, because it has a lot more resolution and it's vari-angle for those who want to have multiple angles for shooting, especially if you're going to find yourself talking to your own camera. So check mark again goes to the EOS R. You will find the same batteries in each one of these cameras. That's the LPE6N battery. Now the EOS R is the only one up here that will allow you to charge it via USB, so if you need to get some extra juice, you can go ahead and plug in and do that via USB. But because they're all going to be very similar, nobody's getting a check mark in this case. Now I know some people may be saying, but Jared, this is a mirrorless camera, the battery life has to suck. It doesn't. I can tell you from usage, it really doesn't suck, and that's why nobody's getting a check mark. Now we're up to the most important test of all, and I know you guys have been waiting for this. It's the wind tunnel test. I'm going to huff and puff and blow on 3, 2, 1. You're a chody one, aren't you, 5D Mark IV? I couldn't even blow past the 5D Mark IV. So that one doesn't get a check mark. The EOS R, just because I like your form factor, you're nice and slim and petite and svelte, you're getting the check mark, bad boy, because I like you. Speaking of svelte, let's talk about the weights. The 5D Mark IV weighs in at 1.76 pounds or 800 grams. The EOS R comes in at 1.45 pounds or 660 grams. And the 6D Mark II comes in at 1.51 pounds or 686 grams. The EOS R is the lightest. It does get another check mark for that one. And since we're talking about weight, let's talk about feel in the hands. 5D Mark IV still feels like a tremendous camera. The 6D Mark II feels very good in the hands. The EOS R feels very good in the hands as well. Nobody's getting a check mark, so none of you are going to be happy with that. But all right, let's sniff them. Let's see what we got. Oh, that smells rosy. That smells like pirate booty. And that just smells like ooh, ooh, ooh. Pirate booty for the check mark all day. EOS R. And finally, the price. 5D Mark IV comes in at a $3,299, but during the holidays, it's on sale for $27.99. The EOS R with the adapter is $23.98. And the 6D Mark II comes in at $17.99, or holy Jesus, during the holidays, $1,299. Even at such a low price, if you needed to get into a full frame game on the Canon market and you didn't have a ton of money to spend, I could see for $12.99 getting a 6D Mark II, because it does have some nice features, though it doesn't shoot 4K, and you may be looking for that. The 5D Mark IV being priced at $32.99 doesn't even belong on this table. Even though it's considered to be the pro camera that's sitting here, I would take the EOS R any day of the week over the 5D Mark IV. It's less expensive. It has better autofocus capability. I can attach my EF lenses to it. I can get RF lenses to it. It has the same video features, except slightly better. It has better ISO capability because it has the same sensor and the new Digic 8 processor. It's one of those things where I never thought that I would say that that the first camera that Canon came out with in the mirrorless lineup would beat their pro-level 5D Mark IV. But the 5D Mark IV lacks in so many ways. Though I will tell you, if you can pick one up for a very good price, it is a fantastic camera if you know what you're doing. You still will get great images with it. It's just when they released it with yesterday's technology. Today's technology brings us to the EOS R, which wins the checkmark challenge for this video. Now, if you'd like to purchase any one of these cameras, or any camera gear for that matter, go to adorama.com/fro. When you use that link, it helps us to continue to make this free content that we love to put out. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think about what I said about the check marks. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Leave some comments down below. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell button. And that's where I'm going to leave it. Thank you guys very much for watching. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya.